I wanted to build a future that AI was good for humanity, and it's building towards human thriving and empowering individuals and society at large. And the current kind of geopolitical race with AI, there's a lot of shortcuts that are being made and a lot of people are scrambling to catch up. And in this case, I think a lot of cybersecurity people, your audience, is kind of bombarded with new ways of doing work and new types of technology that we need to be aware of. Every time you ask a question and you're not memorizing and fully trying to understand and, laterally think how this connects with other knowledge bases that you have in yourself, you are actually chipping away at your critical thinking skills that will render you helpless to something as powerful and convincing as AI. If you don't silo your data in a way that makes sense, you don't build it for-purpose AI with a narrow intention, and you're building your whole business around, a critical business function with an AI that's a third party that you have really no control over. And then it's just like a domino effect and snowball effect of things that can go very wrong very quickly. And I think a lot of business leaders lack the kind of fundamental understanding of what AI is. And a lot of business leaders lack the urgency of cybersecurity as well. So there's a huge knowledge gap that needs to be addressed.
AI is transforming every aspect of our lives, but are we prepared for what comes next? Today, we're joined by Olivia Heslinga, an AI literacy consultant and founder of AI for Good Denmark. From her base in Copenhagen, Olivia works tirelessly to empower others with knowledge they need to navigate AI's ethical complexities and use it responsibly. Olivia, thanks for joining us on the Be Fearless podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, let's talk a little bit about your AI literacy and your mission. AI for Good sounds very noble. What inspired you to name the company as such, and how are you helping others use AI for good?
I got inspired by the knowledge gap that we have in business and technology, especially in regards to how fast the AI is actually moving. So I wanted to build a future that AI was good for humanity, and it's building towards human thriving and empowering individuals and society at large. And the current kind of geopolitical race with AI, there's a lot of shortcuts that are being made and a lot of people are scrambling to catch up. And in this case, I think a lot of cybersecurity people, your audience, is kind of bombarded with new ways of doing work and new types of technology that we need to be aware of. So this is why I wanted to build AI for Good as a foundation to help people with AI literacy in different aspects of their lives and their jobs.
It's a great mission. I think that there is a lot of fear, uncertainty, and doubt around AI today. It somewhat burst, onto the scenes in late 2022 or so, right? Where all of a sudden we have ChatGPT that everyone's talking about. And over the last couple of years, we've seen a lot more applications with AI showing up into the enterprise IT space, right? And not just in enterprise IT, but in commercial and consumer spaces as well, where we're using AI talk to customers in our e-commerce apps and such, right? As it was kind of coming on board, there are so many questions that people have, especially lawyers and such, about AI and, how do we control it?
Yeah, I think first I feel more sorry for cybersecurity people because you guys already had a lot to maintain and keep up with. And then lawyers would be the second people on my list because I think when it comes to regulation, we're extremely behind on tech regulation and human rights in the digital space and human dignity and how we manage privacy and autonomy, and also a way for us to maintain some form of democracy as AI slop kind of takes over our social media feeds and our internet. So I think it's kind of a big snowball effect of all the things that were kind of wrong, but now it's just supercharged with AI. And I think this is part of the reason my AI literacy has kind of pivoted a little bit towards regulation and policy and educating people on that, and why the importance of governance is so fundamental moving forward, because, it takes one crack in the whole system and then the whole thing comes crumbling down. And that's what we're seeing at scale now with like massive data leaks and massive hacking because of AI, making it easier for people. People that are not even experts in computer programming and hacking can now do this. So this is something people need to be mindful of. And why governance? I know governance is probably going to be the word of this podcast, but I can't stress that enough. And part of the reason I got into AI literacy and now cybersecurity is I realized there needs to be more of that conversion happening with both of those expertise.
Yeah. I think the struggle with governance, right, is that, from a cybersecurity practitioner perspective, and I think this is going to apply a lot to the AI space as well, or any technology. Actually, we've been dealing with this from a cybersecurity perspective for some time, is that you have business objectives and you have technology that comes on the scene to help us deliver on some business objective, whether that's using AI as an example in a consumer application to help with, customer support as an example.
Yeah.
The business is going to want to take advantage of AI. They're going to want to lower their costs for providing customer support. In a lot of cases, they're going to push very quickly into delivering AI-assisted customer support, which from a business perspective, I think is a great thing, right? So it's like, yes, let's figure out how do we lower the cost for delivering customer support at a higher quality for a cheaper price. Awesome. Let's do that. Let's make sure our customers are happy. From a security perspective, we're going to be thinking about, how do we control this in a way that allows us to have a good customer support experience, but also make sure that we protect our data and protect the brand of the company, for example. I think that where it becomes problematic is that speed to delivery, right? It's like, do we have enough time to take a look at the threats that are inherent in the system that we're deploying? And are we making the right decisions? But fundamentally, and this is where the crux is, it's not that we can't build governments. A lot of places have governance around how they're going to use AI, but it's the application by the technologists and the understanding by the business people who are actually going to make the decision to deploy or not. They're the ones that need to understand the nitty gritty details of this.
Yeah.
Well, I cybersecurity people, they're going to have nitty gritty details about how it's working, but the actual decision doesn't actually lie with cybersecurity, or it doesn't lie with governance, right? How do we navigate that? The business is going to definitely downplay risk, right? And I don't know if they're downplaying. It's a hard question to answer. Is this too risky to go forward? Or is the reward so great that the risk doesn't matter? How do we navigate that?
Yeah, I think let's start from the basics, right? If you haven't done an audit in your entire infrastructure, that's step one, right? Let's take care of the basic vulnerabilities that needed to be taken care of, which I'm sure there's a long list of that and an ongoing list, but primarily the biggest one. And I highly recommend businesses, whether they have a cybersecurity team, which most don't, most of that is outsourced to external consultants because it is, something that's hard to maintain. And if that's not the primary, bread and butter of the business, but they happen to have a digital infrastructure, which most businesses do, then they will outsource it. That tends to be the business model, right? So now my issue is with businesses is if you, one, have a cybersecurity company running your infrastructure and then you adopt an AI into that. And this is what's crazy because in Europe, I went to a cybersecurity conference recently, the beginning of this year. I genuinely went to as many of the speeches as possible. None of them mentioned doing auditing for a third-party AI, which in some cases is actually a virus into your organization. And I think a lot of businesses don't realize. They just think, oh, this is just another digital tool, but that's really not the case with AI, especially if you give it basically access to any type of data. If you don't silo your data in a way that makes sense, you don't build it for purpose AI with a narrow intention, and you're building your whole business around, a critical business function with an AI that's a third party that you have really no control over. And then it's just like a domino effect and a snowball effect of things that can go very wrong very quickly. And I think a lot of business leaders lack the kind of fundamental understanding of what AI is. And a lot of business leaders lack the urgency of cybersecurity as well. So there's a combination of there's a huge knowledge gap that needs to be addressed. And I think it needs to be a humble undertaking because AI is moving super fast. So none of us really knows what's going on because we don't own the models ourselves. We don't have any transparency over the models or the data sets. We have an inkling of what's going on by kind of monitoring it, but that's over time. But other than that, it's kind of like we're shooting in the dark and hoping we hit a bullseye. And in the meantime, you're paying a lot of money for building a model that's supposed to be custom to your business. And if your entire business is going to be wrapped around an AI model that you have no control over, and that AI model goes down or gets hacked or, data polluted in some way, now all of a sudden you're at risk. And I've noticed that I'm actually looking a lot in the US to kind of gauge the trajectory of this, because you guys are leading this in a lot of ways. And I'm an American myself, so this is of interest to me as an American too. But I think we're coming to a point where I think businesses are starting to realize, okay, this might actually cost me money. You have to be strategic on where you're going to implement AI and the mitigation risk and the, kind of counteract of what that happens when you have to shut it off if there's a kill switch involved. So I think it gets very complicated. This is why a lot of business leaders, again, will outsource that to someone else, hoping for the best. And I think that's a very dangerous strategy to go for.
I agree. I think definitely a difficult space to navigate. A lot of people don't have the expertise in-house. A lot of companies don't have expertise in-house to do the AI on their own. So they're always bringing in different consultants. I mean, my experience is very much the same. Well, we didn't even have to go out to find consultants. We had consultants coming to us telling us about their AI, what they were doing with AI and how they could help us in, my previous company. And, and you get different points of view, right? There's a lot of talk about outcomes and return on investments. And again, I think that part of it is that there are, and we're being told that, hey, we should find that strategic AI application that we should be focused on and kind of get our legs underneath us with this strategic application. I worry that even though we may want to have a strategic application, something that we can point to in the company that says, hey, this is something we're doing with AI and look at the value that we've created. That's great. I mean, we should do that. However, I think that some of the real challenges with AI is just how ubiquitous it is inside companies. Meaning that even though we're maybe talking about customer support application, that's the business problem that we're going to solve. A lot of AI is just being used inside of the company, meaning that your marketing people and your HR people and your legal team and your sales team and your cybersecurity team, your IT teams, and your developers and engineers. All of these people it's so easy to access AI today, whether it's through a browser or through an AI extension, through, in your development tool set. So there's kind of two parts of it, right? There's what's the business going to do with it, right? Meaning what business processes are they going to enable with AI and all the problems around with that. But then we also have the other problem with is how is it that our employees and our users are using it as well?
I mean, in Denmark, where I'm primarily working from, we've implemented a lot of private chatbots. It's basically an API wrapper to ChatGPT, where there are a bit of a filter. So we know what's being used, the output and input. We do a very quick training for the employees, like you have to use this ChatGPT. It might be a lot more limited on what you can use, but you're only allowed to use this on your computer and during work. So that the IT department has a bit of traction on the cyber part of it. And also we can actually flag if they're sending out sensitive information to, a black box somewhere else. That's like AI policy 101. In the larger scheme of things, I think a lot of companies are now looking into hiring. There's been a lot of hiring now for in-house AI experts to start building in-house AI models on-prem servers so that it's more secure. And then you have a much more control over your environment and maybe some hybrid setups and such. I think the complexity of it and how ubiquitous it is, as you said, makes it tempting for people to use it. And this is why I think AI literacy or just technical literacy in general, including cybersecurity, is actually something that should have been taught in schools, still isn't really taught in schools. Isn't really taught so much in the universities unless you're taking a specific computer science course or you're going that route specifically. But we live in a digital world and we have such a huge gap in digital literacy. It's crazy that we think literacy at a very basic level is like, oh, do you know how to open an email and use, a Microsoft or Google product? That's it. And I'm like, well, that's not actually literacy. That's just knowing how to use a tool. That's very different. Literacy is fully understanding how the tool is even built. AI, of course, complicates things because now you have to be a data scientist and a machine learning expert, and in some cases, a cybersecurity expert, an architect expert. I mean, the list goes on. And I like to also point out it's actually a lot of social science as well. You need to understand the behavior of the AI and the behavior of the people using AI, because that adds to the complexity of how it's affecting your organization. And if you're not monitoring what we call in AI model drift, as in the model is now getting new data every day, and then within a month or two or even a year, the model is going to behave completely differently because now the data is showing something different. And also cognitive drift, which is your employees. How are their behaviors and their thought processes and their work processes changing now that they have an AI tool? Is it to their detriment or is it actually empowering them? Are you showing them a bias that you weren't planning on training them on? Because that's also the difficulty, right? If you're training a bias into your model or you didn't clean up that bias you don't want to see, that will eventually affect your users that are being exposed to that bias. So it's just like, again, another snowball effect that we have to be super mindful of. And I think the part of the reason people are kind of copping out, I would say, with the literacy part of tech literacy is we're so far behind that it's overwhelming. And in some good and bad ways, AI is bringing a lot of these things to light. So we have a lot of catch up to do, not only within our individual fields, but I think now we're up against AI itself that has, unlimited memory, unlimited compute power. So it's kind of like we've reached a point of no return where we are now learning with the very thing that we created, which is kind of ironic, right? Because, it's not like the parent should be teaching the child as such, but now we're both kind of in this phase of unknown. We are developing our cognitive abilities together with technology for the first time. It's a very interesting time to be alive, but also very scary, right? Because if our kids, for example, or people who are just maybe not as self-aware are using these kind of tools, it's becoming a bit of a replacement in some cases for human connection and human understanding. But then it's also kind of filtering the complexities behind algorithms to a larger extent that we've never seen before in our human history. So I don't really know where to start other than I think people just really need to understand the effects that it's going to be having on themselves and their maybe local community, because it's going to change a lot of things. We know it's not going to be like the internet. It's going to be so much crazier, I think, actually.
I'm in agreement. I think that we still don't have a real good understanding of how technology has impacted and changed the behaviors of Generation Z, millennials to some degree, Gen Z, the next generation. These are people that have grown up with technology in their hands the entire time and having like social media and videos and Google search, and their ways of dealing with the world is completely different than, my Gen X, how I deal with technology in the world as well. Right. So there's definitely differences. And I think we don't really understand yet how that has played into those generations' points of view. And now we're adding this into the mix of it. We're adding AI into the mix with it, where we just have so much information that is available to people today that they didn't have available to them in the past. I mean, it's one thing doing a Google search for a subject. It's a completely different thing to have that Google search, your intent, your question answered for you by technology so quickly.
Yeah, I think, I'm from the millennial generation, and I think I've been blessed to know the difference between the two. I'm not a native 100%, a digital native, but I've also had a childhood without social media that has shown, detriment to mental health and social connections. So I can see the possibility of where AI can take us, but also the scary part of it for native digital people that, are building relationships with AI now. This is like the largest use cases for generative AI is actually companionship and life coaching, which basically fundamentally has replaced human wisdom in some ways, right? So I think there is something scary to this idea because of how easy the generation, the younger generation, how easy it is for them to adapt a technology without question, without, critical thinking and developing what we call cognitive debt. Every time you ask a question and you're not memorizing and fully trying to understand and, laterally think how this connects with other knowledge bases that you have in yourself, you are actually, chipping away at your critical thinking skills that will render you helpless to something as powerful and convincing as AI. And this is another thing that I'm trying not to get too deep into in terms of educating the younger generation on, because that's not my target group. I'm very much trying to focus on the business people, but this is something I also need to bring up, especially to parents that have kids that will be exposed to this in one way or another. This is something that we have to think about because it's a slow process. It's a slow poison into the brain in some sense, because it's kind of like an easy addiction. People want easy stuff I know as a human myself, I'm lazy. And it can get that dependency before you know it. You don't realize, oh, I've actually haven't used my brain today. I've been using AI to do most of my work and writing my emails and summarizing reports that I should have read myself. Those kind of things very quickly chips away at not only your cognitive abilities, but also your self-worth as a person if you haven't developed that yet. If you're a young mind going out into the world, trying to understand it, and you're so dependent on AI to tell you how to think and live, then I think we've introduced something that we're simply not ready for.
I like the term you used, the cognitive drift. We definitely, on the technology side, we've talked about model drift, right? But cognitive drift, I think, is very interesting. And I can definitely tell that you're passionate about the subject. How did you get this fuel for making AI accessible and understandable to everyone? I mean, I think it's incredible. Where did this passion come from? How did you get here?
Yeah, I ask myself that sometimes every day when I'm dealing with this. My background is in marketing and communications. So I've always worked in technology. I love tech. I love SaaS companies and those kind of things. So I've always, challenged myself to learn how technology is being built and then making that simplified for business people, our clients that we're trying to sell the SaaS solution to. So for me, it's a very natural trajectory into AI, but then AI was a whole nother beast that I had. Working in algorithms is one thing. Machine learning, automation is, pennies or, baby steps compared to AI. So I think I've been following very closely AI and the narrative that's being used in different spheres of AI. I like to look at academia as well, which I think is very much missing in the discussion because they're much more critical and a lot more science oriented in that sense. Like they want to prove certain hypotheses rather than marketing hype. So I'm beginning to realize there is a space, a very tiny, narrow space for people like me to try to bridge the gap between these three big words: business, society, and also technology itself. And I find a passion for it because I feel quite perturbed about where we're going with it. Like the trajectory of this is actually quite disturbing because it's fundamentally chipping away at our human rights. It's fundamentally chipping away at our privacy. And, in a larger scale, it's becoming so much easier to use data and hack data and impersonate people across the globe, which will be, an economic disaster. And a political disaster. So I think it's already happening. We've seen deep fakes and things like social media, Cambridge Analytics, shaping the masses and morphing reality itself. So I think this is why I'm very passionate about it, because I can see the lack of critical thinking happening. I can also see the hype that's happening. There's a lot of big talk, AI can do this, AI can do that. There's a lot of AI cannot do a lot of stuff too, which we're not like highlighting in the news feeds or anything else, right? Because it's a geopolitical race at this point. It's an arms race. And I'm just trying to build a little bit of calmness and a little bit of a reality check into all of this so that we can build it in a safe way. And this is why I wanted to start AI for Good, with my main focus being, to bridge that knowledge gap. And of course, I realize I myself have a huge knowledge gap in cybersecurity, which is why, I guess you and I decided to meet and have this podcast, because very interested to hear your angle on this. What do you see needs to be done in terms of literacy?
Well, I think that from a literacy perspective, there's kind of two aspects to, I think, securing technology altogether. And I actually don't see AI too differently than other technologies that we've had from a data breach and data confidentiality and privacy concern problems, right? It kind of fits a pattern. It's an application. I have inputs, it has outputs, it has data on the back end. So like the model for me seems very familiar, so securing it, I feel like just like you were talking about earlier, where you were talking about, providing an application that, you're controlling the input, you're able to look at the outputs and you're seeing what's happening in the model, and whether it's hybrid or private or whatever, how do you control it, right? And I think that goes a long way to like, how do you secure it? Other part of it is, the time of confidentiality. How do you control for that? And I think that we know how to do that because we've actually had applications on the web that were trying to not maybe maliciously getting control of our data, whether that's JSON beautifiers or Word to PDF. Lots of people like to take a Word document and make it a PDF, or take a PDF document, make it Word. And those are going to some other system where our files are going somewhere and then they're coming back to us in a different form, but we had to give it away before we could get it back. right? So,
Yeah.
and this problem has been there for, I'll say decades, right? So that part of the problem isn't really that different, even though I think what's different about it is how accessible these technologies have become so quickly. I mean, just the growth curve on this has just been insane.
Exponential, yeah.
Yeah. So it's insane. So I think the quantity is a big thing. And I think that's probably where companies worry about it the most from internal use cases, like your employees using Gen AI is, hey, how do I make sure that my confidential information doesn't go out to the web or doesn't become part of a model? And if you looked at the very early news articles after ChatGPT came out, it was like all these companies, Samsung and Apple and everyone saying, don't use ChatGPT or whatever. And now part of that was also they're trying to conserve, I think it's marketing in some ways, meaning that they have their own models coming out and they're trying to, slow down the adoption of ChatGPT because it's been hard to pull them off that hill, get customers to go somewhere else. But, so there's some amount of just technical competition that's happening that's stopping people from doing it. But that part of it, I think, is controllable. I think the harder part is, when you take AI and you say, hey, it's okay to look at all of my data that I have inside my company. And companies are producing terabytes and terabytes of data every single day, and this is just internal to companies. And when you unleash AI, now you have a lot of data that's all of a sudden going to be summarizable and made available to people that may not have needed access to that information or that data. So there's those kinds of problems. But then you have prompt injections where external actors or even internal actors, insider threats can get access to data that you didn't intend for them to get access to just because they were able to circumvent security of the underlying system. There's ways that we can control that, right? And one of the things that we are heavily, on the SquareX side looking at is like, hey, how do we control the inputs and the outputs and look for prompt injections that are in those kinds of things? And how do we, monitor for, people uploading confidential information? So there's lots of ways that we can technically control it. I think the part that's difficult to control is critical thinking skills. It's like, and I remember having a conversation with an attorney about using AI internally. And the question he had is, what if the AI gives you an answer that's wrong?
Which actually has happened in a couple law cases where they just made up cases that, exactly.
Hallucinations, right? Right? So it hallucinates, gives you an answer that may or may not be true. And and I'll be honest with you, I'm Gen X, right? I feel like I was forced to do critical thinking activities like my entire going through school. And so when someone tells me something, I don't just believe them. I always have a filter in my head that's, hey, do I trust is the information that I'm being told, is it valid? Does it pass a sniff test? Does the person that I'm talking to, do they have the background to have a real opinion on this? Do they have the right data and that kind of stuff? So it's like I'm applying a lot of critical thinking skills when I interact with people. And so I was a little surprised by this attorney's question is like, well, what if it gives me the wrong answer? And I'm like, this is exactly what I told him. I said, this happens to me like every day in every conversation, every meeting that I have. And like, I'm really always, every time I'm talking to somebody, I'm always filtering and I'm thinking, aren't other people going to do that too? All because a chat bot on the other side's telling you something. Does that make it true? And I think that's the hard part is like I'm more worried about people being taken advantage of because there's two things about it. And one is that these AIs, because we're going so fast, and I just did a webinar about this a few weeks ago about browser AI agents. And we're trying to deliver as a species using AI to deliver value as quickly as possible. And we're at the beginning of this marathon. We don't have the guardrails and everything else inside of these systems. But in this webinar, we're talking about browser AI agents, where you just tell an AI agent to, hey, can you do some research for me on some random topic and then send me a email with a summarized report in whatever format.
Yeah.
And this browser AI agent has no guardrails. They're just going to do a search on Google, start clicking links, download information, summarize it, pick different tools to go and send it to you. And this very enthusiastic and undiscerning agent can take your identity, meaning the identity that you're using to log into different applications and your data that you have access to in your enterprise, in your email or in your Google Drive or whatever it is that you're using. And they're able to give another application on the internet, potentially owned by a hacker, rights to your Google Drive, rights to your email, rights to your Zoom
wallet, your money,
your wallet, your money, access to your password manager, get access to your bank accounts. You're given this enthusiastic agent who really wants to be successful, wants you to be successful. He actually has no wants, but he's been programmed to make you happy, and they just get you in trouble. Right? They just start clicking links. They start doing things. They add your credentials everywhere. And from you as a user, you got what you wanted. You got something done as quickly as possible, but there's no discernment in the AI agent of how that was done. And that could have led you through a minefield of cybersecurity problems that put your personal data at risk, your bank account information at risk, and not just for just then when they were doing it, but for years to come.
Yeah, I mean, this is why AI slop is a huge problem. We have an information crisis now because of it, and that's getting fed to other AI models. And we have built the internet in a kind of, let's say, a little bit of a naive, openly trusting community kind of way. The initial IP architecture had, very noble efforts, but now it really needs to be updated with proper verification. I think Cloudflare is one of the first I've read, one of the big players that actually made it so that AI can't scrape their websites. One, because it costs them money to be scraped by AI. It actually jumps your compute usage and your DNS, all your entire bill just goes crazy basically. And the other part is they don't know what these AI agents are doing. So if they're going in there and stealing data straight off your website, whether that's customer data by, prompting, as you said, but also just gathering content data into their models for their data harvesting, we are seeing a shift now from companies like Cloudflare. And I think Microsoft just announced something similar for their Azure hosted websites. They're realizing that this is actually getting out of control. They need to actually develop new tools to prevent AI, even their own AI, from doing something like that against their customer. So I think it's kind of like we're playing cat and mouse with each other in a way. Like we're very reactionary, I think, when it comes to IT problems rather than preventative. And I always tell people it's not that hard to, kind of make an educated guess where we're going with this technology when we don't have the fundamentals in place, when we don't have verification credentials, a value, verification chain through multiple players in place, where we don't have internet protocols that make sense so that it's unhackable. So we don't do what we call web shells. It's very easy now to do web shells with AI. You can click a link. It'll take you to a whole different website that looks exactly like the website you think you are. Now you're entering your credit card information, your data, your address and everything. And now that's gone. And you can go, the funny thing is you can automate that so that AI will then buy the stuff you think you're buying through the real website, but now has all your information. I'm honestly genuinely afraid to go online and shop now because I know too much about these things and how easy it is to forge. And right. Until that gets fixed, I don't think people should actually be shopping online. That's how serious it's gotten.
Well, I think that there's definitely minefields on the internet, and there's definitely a lack of awareness of sites being impersonated, right? And again, two things. One, I think it's fortunate that we do have technology that helps prevent a consumer from going to a site that's impersonating a site and you're asking to put your credentials in and so they can harvest them. And just like you said, then continue the fraud by going and ordering it for you on Amazon for you, right? On your behalf, right? Yeah. Or wherever you're shopping. And I think that those tools are fundamentally in enterprises. Again, this is exactly the kind of problem that we solve at SquareX. However, doing that in consumer world is completely different. It's like, how do we do it to protect our consumers, which is a large part of the population that's using the internet? I think we could do a better job as an industry, both on the cyber side and the vendor side, the people that are actually like the Amazons and the banks and we could all be doing a better job. But I think a lot of it comes down to literacy, making sure that people are understanding what it is that they're doing online and how to tell whether they're being defrauded, right? Being taken advantage of. I think it's difficult. I mean, I think that we've been in this situation, in this arms race from a cybersecurity perspective for, it seems like decades now. I mean, I remember dealing with these before I was even an adult in the late 80s, people talking about securing code and securing intellectual property and those kinds of things. And this is just for like software piracy. And I remember people in the 80s talking about, oh, this is solvable. In 10 years, this won't be a problem. 40 years later, and we still have the problem. This problem isn't going away. And I really don't think that people, we're not going to get people to not shop online, right? They're going to.
But I mean, I think people need to be mindful of tools, like you said, that can help them ensure that the website they're on is legit and verified and secure in some way.
Absolutely. And I definitely feel like there's opportunity for protecting our consumers in a number of different ways, right? And I just think it's just a matter of figuring out, like, hey, how do we do it? I think with respect to AI, I mean, again, we're at the beginning of this journey. We're a few years in. 10 years from now, this landscape from a governance perspective, from a security perspective, is going to be completely different. I go back and forth on governance because I think that governance is good. Being a CISO, I think governance is good. I think education and awareness programs are good. I do worry about over-governing so early on that it prevents or creates it stops innovation. Right. I mean,
there's always a balance. And I think with AI, and like I said, in some good and bad ways, it's brought to light a lot of things we need to fix. Sometimes you need a lot of things to break for people to start reacting. And I think that's what we're seeing now.
No, I agree. I think that you have to have enough users and enough use cases that you are able to see where the edges are. You got to know where the edges are, before you can put guardrails in place. If you start guessing at where things are going and you start putting governance in place without understanding the actual threats that are occurring, there's lots of risks. There's millions and there's way more risks in the world than there are threats. So something that could happen isn't the same as something that is happening. And that's how I kind of move between risks and threats. If we start governing risks, everything that could happen, then two things is that one is that we're probably stifling innovation. And two, we're probably missing the threats that are actually happening to folks, right? So we need to be mindful of not pre-governing on things before we know where it's going or where the technology is going. We don't know which model is going to win. We don't know which technology company is going to win. We don't know what the form factor of the technology is going to be best used for. I mean, if you had asked me this 10 years ago, would I have thought we were going to have autonomous self-driving cars in San Francisco, get on my phone and have someone pick me up and there's no people in the car? I don't know that I would have thought that would have happened in that 10-year period, but it's happening right now. It was a great experience to have, have you been on Waymo? I don't know if you've tried Waymo yet.
No, I have. I saw a meme on that, actually, the Waymo cars uprising where they're all in a parking lot honking at each other. And that's the first time I heard of Waymo.
That is so funny. Amazing experience. But I think that...
But Google had that back in the early 2000s on the campuses, right? They had autonomous vehicles, but only on the Google campus, I remember.
Yeah. And when I remember at Intel back in the 90s, they had little robots that delivered mail, right? I mean, it's not new. I think what's new is the availability of that just in general. It's like the cost of production has come down so low that more people can get involved in the industry. Right? We had robotics, but anyway, it is what it is. But I think that as we get into AI, we got to just kind of watch where the governance happens, and I worry about slowing it down. I mean, it's people being engaged with systems that they don't understand. I mean, I just look at my younger son and how he engages with technology. It's completely different than the way that I engage with technology. And it's, I think, concerning, but at the same time, I'm hoping as a species, we're able to navigate it and it doesn't turn into like a Terminator type event,
I mean, in some places of the world, that's already happening with the lethal autonomous weapons, but we won't get into that geopolitical discussion. I think there's a balance with innovation. I think fundamentally what's been happening with technology, it's primarily profit driven. It's not society oriented. It's not data privacy oriented. It doesn't necessarily, in a weird way, they found this really sweet loophole where they can push a lot of crazy innovation, like AI, out into the world without regulation to see what happens. Like, how are people reacting? They're developing their use cases. They're crowdsourcing. They're crowd testing. Mm-hmm. I think up to an extent that's fine, but again, it's kind of like you are now feeding the masses with something as powerful as AI without the proper education behind it to understand first and foremost the limitations. But for me, and we touched on this a little bit, for me, I'm much more passionate and much more concerned about the human effects of AI. I think we work in technology, so maybe for us, it doesn't sound as scary because we understand the limitations of it. We understand, how you can build guardrails, how you can build tools, how you can use it in a way that makes, sense for the application. That gives us a very big advantage because we're kind of ahead of the curve in that sense. We've been following this technology for a while. I think for the user end of it, things, including myself, I think the cognitive effects, the social effects, and also the dependency that happens between this type of technology is much more scary, I think. And it's evolving faster than we can keep up with. So like just when you think you have a grasp of the model or what it can do, or maybe you've built a fine-tuned version for a very specific application, the moment there's an update, the moment there's a new model out there, now you're starting from scratch again. And it's like we as humans cannot do that. We have to unlearn so much faster now, to the point where I'm like, I don't think I can keep up. And I'm reading news and studying this every single day. And the amount of information and changes that are happening, I think this is where I'm more concerned about, is more the kind of human and societal implications of AI that haven't been fully talked about. Because as you said, if people are more aware of what AI is and how to use it properly without hurting themselves, then I would feel a lot safer at night going to bed thinking, okay, AI is going to be a great innovation boost. AI is going to do a lot of great things because we can use it in a way that makes sense for us. But as we see from the cybersecurity side, AI is also, exacerbating a lot of security problems that we've already had at scale now. So I mean, it has, it's a double-edged sword in that sense.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, being in the industry and having a knowledge of like the technologies and how they work, my point of view on it is different. I definitely don't feel as threatened by it because I'm a knowledgeable user. I'm a maybe fully literate user in this space. When I look at an application and it's asking me for permissions, I'm very cognizant of what it's asking me and what it is that I'm giving. Wrong guy to be having an opinion about how the societal things. And I think I've learned a lot from you just about how this may be impacting society. And I'm seeing the truth in it from what I'm seeing with my own kids, right? And how they're being impacted by the technology. And then talking to my wife about how she consumes technology is different than the way that I consume technology. And I think that bringing technology to the masses like this, again, I think it's good for society. I think it's in the long run, it's good. I think we'll figure it out. I have faith in humanity that everything's going to be okay. I mean, I think that's like maybe the worst thing about being a CISO is I maybe in a lot of ways, I think people think of CISOs as a kind of a negative group of people, but I think to actually be successful, you have to be hopeful that everything's going to be okay eventually. Right? So,
that's a nice way of putting it.
yeah. Eventually, when is eventually, right? But I think that the worrisome, again, what are the detrimental effects to our use of AI, and how do we shield society from it? I've always been a technologist, so I always think every time there's new technology, it's going to be to the benefit of society. That doesn't mean that there haven't been negative consequences to society as well. I think technology has a large part to do with, declining birth rates, and the access to information is definitely having societal impact. I'm not sure. I don't know. I think we're too young into this technology technology altogether and AI in particular to know what the long-term impacts are going to be?
I think it's going to come very much down to the individual and honestly the collective human. What we agree upon is right to use this technology for. And I can already see the stark difference between the US narrative of AI versus the EU narrative. And right now we're at a kind of an impasse on we realizing from not only a cybersecurity perspective, but from an AI perspective, where we're kind of balancing act between the dependencies of, now I'm speaking from the EU perspective, of a foreign tech stack from cloud to internet infrastructure to hardware even, is all coming from outside of Europe. And we're talking about data dignity and data sovereignty and being able to manage our AI moving forward, but we have absolutely no control over our data or infrastructure. So that narrative is very strong right now in EU, and in America, it's a very different narrative, right? Because America's the powerhouses. They're the ones that own, 90% of the internet traffic and hardware traffic and server traffic and AI traffic. So I think it's very interesting to follow both narratives and both stories right now, because it gives you an insight. Something in the middle is probably what's ideal, right? We need, to some extent, to build technology that, AI as a public good, rather, not profit driven, where different aspects of society share the wealth, share the information, share the data, and share how we manage and check each other, like checks and balances that should happen. So it's not all in one company, one monopoly, and we're at the mercy of whoever's running that company. I think this is something that I'm trying to balance as an American here in EU. Mm-hmm. I'm very mindful that, my presence here means something different, and I need to bring a bit of truth in that to help balance that out. Because as you said, innovation is one thing. Having agency and power over your future is a whole different topic altogether. If you're putting technology on top of that kind of builds a filter and complicates things sometimes unnecessarily.
Yeah, I definitely feel like the narrative seems to be more concerned about China and how they're ramping up their AI programs. And we feel, from my perspective, much more competitive than we think about the EU, to be honest, right? So
and that is the case, yeah.
And it feels like the EU is doing what they can to kind of put in governance and controls into places that are actually stifling their innovation and not making technology available to them so that they could take advantage of it as well. It's kind of a weird situation geopolitically with respect to US, China, EU, and how are we all going to market? How is it that we're looking at this technology and figuring out how it is that we're going to take advantage of it? Right? And what's the right approach, right?
Well, I mean, I will simplify it. I don't like that EU is acting like a technological police officer, because that's unrealistic considering 90% of our infrastructure is American. So that would be dumb to play that role. And I'm not a politician, so I'm going to be very blunt about it. I think what we should be doing, rather, in EU is developing laws that helps protect the consumer. So every time there are cases where there should have been better, best practices, there should have been better certificates, there should have been better IT infrastructure, there should have been better protection for the user, for the consumer, for society. That's where the regulation should be focused on. Mm-hmm. Instead of, trying to wrangle massive big tech giants that have billions of dollars of lobbying money, to change their business model. That's really unrealistic. What we should be doing is actually protecting the consumer. And we've already seen cases about that, with a lot of big tech, actually, that we've gotten money back for further investigation, for further protection for the society. And I think this is where the balance needs to happen for the EU. From the American perspective, it's a weird race, because it's similar to the arms race, right? It's like, yeah, okay, whoever has the most nukes, even though nukes will never win out on anything because we're just destroy ourselves, but yet we still have to build them. It's like, it's a weird... It's kind of a weird place to be when you're building these mass data centers to harvest more data in order to build better models. But then once the models are built, what happens to these data centers? Are we going to continuously harvest data? Are we living in the matrix where we're just like, plugged into the matrix and just getting all our data sucked away with all our ideas and all our IP? I don't know. That's like, for me, that's the real Terminator outcome. And it's kind of already happening because that's the business model right now. So I think with American standards, I think I really hope with the bill that just came out with the administration, I hope that they don't deter states from regulating their own turf, because I think that's super important moving forward. Some states are already behind digitally, so it won't really affect them. Some states are going to be leading, like Texas is going to be probably the new Silicon Valley, as you probably know. And I think they should have, their own jurisdiction on this, because they're going to be doing their own thing, right? And each state should have control of what that looks like, I think. Because once you zoom it out to all 50 states, it's going to get very complex.
It's very confusing. I mean, just privacy laws in the United States have been difficult to navigate from a cyber perspective, business protection perspective. It's really odd. I mean, it's like where we should be doing federal laws and having some sort of common standards. Yeah. We don't. And then we have places that we really shouldn't be regulating. We regulate. It's the United States, in some aspects, the EU and the EU model, I think we should be looking at how that's working and saying, let's take advantage of what's working. In the US, we tend to push it down to the state level, which is, again, fine. It's worked for us for hundreds of years, 250 years almost.
Yeah, but maybe with tech, it doesn't make sense. You're right. It's scalable. It's also
scalable. Yeah. It goes across boundaries very, very quickly. Yeah. I mean, there's no limiting to it. So it's hard to regulate in the way it's done in the US. But at the same time, we are allowing innovation to happen. And that has been generally good for our economy. It's been good for our defensive industrial base. It's been good for consumers. But there have been negative impacts as well. And I think that we really haven't focused on the negative impacts enough.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think we have plenty of data to know what negative impacts technology that hasn't been primarily thought out with the profit-driven and attention economy kind of, business models. I think we then can regulate from there. We have enough data from that alone. And I think moving forward with AI, I'm very much in the same line with the EU in the sense that I just want laws that protect the users should an AI model or AI company somehow, screws me over, whether that's, through a law case, that whether that's through health. There's a couple of cases already with an AI algorithm discriminating because of biases that, left someone who needed critical medicine out of the system. And that's just bad programming. And that, again, should be protecting the consumer, not the company. I think there needs to be a balance between that, where there is an outlet, a third-party, non-biased outlet that will support citizens to be empowered, get justice from certain, negligence, basically.
Yes. I'm going to be following you, seeing what you're doing. I hope we have another conversation again. But before we leave, I wanted to talk about looking forward, thinking about the future a little bit. AI for Good Denmark is aiming to drive positive change in Denmark and beyond. And as we head into the, we're already in the second half of 2025, but as we, head deeper into 2025, what's one cultural shift around AI that you believe more organizations should embrace to truly achieve a positive impact?
I think, as with any technological tool, I think getting your workforce literate around the tool will actually help you make innovation that makes sense for your company. So that's a win-win, right? You're not only going to have a smarter workforce, you're going to have a workforce that actually understands what the tool can do, and then come up with ideas to streamline the workflow or streamline information better so that your company actually thrives. And that not only empowers the human aspect of your company, it will make a technology that makes sense for your company. Because I think this one-size-fits-all AI chatbot is not the way to go. It costs a lot of money to build, run, and compute. And it usually doesn't make sense for your company. You have to do a lot of rework for it to make sense, right? And what better way to involve the workforce in that conversation by making them smart enough to know the limitations of the tool itself, be aware of the risk that they're taking when using a tool in a certain way, but also adding to the governance part, developing an AI model that actually helps them do their job better. I mean, that's a very simplified way of understanding how AI literacy and AI for good can help with that process.
Great, Olivia. I'm so glad to have you on the show, and I look forward to talking to you the next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm also excited to see where SquareX goes in this space. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of work for you in the future too.